Hello. This evening we're going to talk about the Abraham teaching on death, on suicide, on grief, and on coma. Now, the teaching is if you're physical, you're alive. See it, touch it, feel it. If you're non-physical, you're alive. And you're still focused in the physical. The Abraham teaching is that every death is a suicide. Why is that? That's because nobody can do anything to us that we don't allow, that we don't invite into our vibration. Now, maybe the doctors don't agree with the Abraham teaching. And maybe some people say, well, where there's life, there's hope, and people need to be kept alive under every circumstance. The Abraham teaching is not promoting suicide. It's just saying that every death is a suicide because nobody else can do anything to you unless you have vibrationally yourself brought that in to your life. You are creating everything in your life, including any rendezvous with a car, a murderer, a knife, whatever, at the time of your death. So Abraham says there is no death. But for tonight, for this video, we're going to call it death, just to make it simple. So what's the appropriate amount of grief? First of all, we have to realize that the first part of our emotional guidance system is the feeling feedback that we get from Source. The only reason that we ever feel bad is because we're thinking a thought that Source cannot come out of the vortex to think. So, the grief that you believe you feel about the death of your family member or your friend, whatever, that's not about the death. The grief that you feel about any person or any situation, the grief is not about that. The feeling that you have that you believe is grief is your misalignment. It's your separation from your source, because the thoughts that you're thinking are thoughts that your source cannot come out of the vortex to think with you. And therefore that's misalignment, and that's painful. So you say, oh, I miss that person, or I want them around. The person's not missing. You may feel that like a yearning, but yearning is not love. Death doesn't separate you from anyone. Vibration separates you from people. So what you're going through is a misalignment. Because in your time of thinking about this person, you're not thinking about them the same way that Source thinks about them. So your interest has to be in closing that gap. The world grieves unnecessarily. That's the teaching. Because you have the power to come back to your joy. You have no control over the conditions. Unconditional love says, I can't control the conditions, but I can align with the love that I have for you, because love is my true nature. Conditional love is bondage, and bondage and grief are the same vibration. So you work on your alignment the best you can, and things will come to you. Not going to happen all at once. Or it may happen all at once. But sometimes it's not as easy as you probably think I'm saying. Okay, so let's talk about a coma. What is a coma? If you're in a room with somebody that's in a coma or just trying to communicate vibrationally, you can communicate with that person, because we don't really communicate with words anyway. Your loved one might not show any signs of recognition, but vibrational communication can be given and received. Because you get no response doesn't mean that your communication was not heard. You can communicate those who've already made their transition. So don't assume that just because somebody's in a comatose state that you cannot communicate with them. Why do people go into a coma? Because they've had some thoughts that have been difficult to deal with, thoughts of lack, and it was difficult for them. And they want a period of refreshment, a period of rest from those thoughts. You'll know some people will just stay in a coma for a few days or a few weeks. What they're in there is kind of like a fetus in the womb in preparation for being born. They're in communication with their inner being, they're in communication with their cells, but they just need a rest and refreshment. The best attitude that you can have if somebody's in a coma is to be very unconditional about it. Say to them, whether vibrationally or in person, I want you to do what's best for you. I want you to do what you want to do. I'm going to approve of whatever you do. If you decide to stay, I'm going to be happy for you. If you decide to go, I'm going to be happy for you. You do what's best for you. And that's the best you can do for somebody in a coma. And what about those people that have been in a coma for a lot of years? Well, mostly. They've left their body. It's just that the people around them have decided that life is important, that the being physical is important, and where there's life, there's hope, and they've hooked them up to this machine. And it doesn't matter because that person's probably been gone a long time ago. So, to repeat, if you're physical, you're alive. If you're in non-physical, what they call dead, you're alive. If you're in a coma, as long as your life force is still there, you're alive. And even if you've left that coma and gone into non-physical, you're still alive. You cannot die. Life is eternal. We are eternal beings. Abraham says that when we leave the physical plane and go into non-physical, it doesn't take that long, our first response is usually laughter. Why is our first response usually laughter? Because we took this life so seriously. So you can't die. There's no reason to be afraid of death. You cannot die. You didn't come here alone. You have your emotional guidance system with you. So when some thought does not feel good, you have to go back to my inner being cannot come out of the vortex to think this thought with me. What would my inner being think? I hope that brings you some peace about the subject. Have a great week. Go forth and prosper.